What's going on, kids? It is Dr. Remy LeBeau, and I'm coming at you once again from the Xler to provide you my very deep and insightful reaction to the latest episode of Legion. This was Legion, Season 2, the finale, Episode 11. We got the big confrontation, we got some revelations, and we got some bridge to what's coming next, and also insights into the bigger story that's being told here, which is like always, of course, about Legion. It's about David Haller. It's about his journey of discovery and everybody else's journey of discovery with respect to like what his ultimate role is in the world and the extent to which his powers can or cannot be controlled and how much they may or may not be a danger to the greater population of Earth. And so it's a really great focus on a character that I never expected to have happen, especially in a television show with as many resources as are being put into this one. So it's exciting, but it's certainly not your classic hero story, right? And like we as an audience are constantly in the dark about what's actually going on. At the end of this episode, like we don't know if the Shadow King is controlling everybody and trying to fuck with David to kind of push him over the edge, or if indeed, like, David does have it in him to become the villain on his own. You know? We saw the multiple personalities in this episode. We saw 3 of them, but in the comics, Legion has several multiple personalities, and each one has a different power. And so, we're sort of getting glimpses into that, and I don't know if the show is actually going to take it there, but that the pedigree, the stuff that happened outside of the show, the stuff that happened in the comics, leads me to believe that what we are seeing is us being established as viewers about this fact, the fact that David is crazy. David does have issues, and the question of whether or not he's a threat to humanity as a whole is a valid one. But the reality is that the Shadow King is also a threat. And so I don't know what to think about the very end. I mean, when the Shadow King spoke to the mouse, obviously getting him to communicate whatever it is he wanted to communicate to Sid, was that control or was that him taking away the things that David had told her? That had caused her to forget her recent memories and forget like this transition that she made. Or is it Farouk just reminding her of the delusion that he created for her? Because the whole idea that she could actually turn that way is actually simply a reflection of his control over her. It's all that is completely unclear, which I'm comfortable with. Not everything needs to be resolved. We don't need to get to like a final point in the season that kind of feels like everything's been resolved. That doesn't really make sense within this world and within this story. So I'm happy that there's still a lot, of course, open. We did definitely get a resolution to the Shadow King arc of the season, and I was very satisfied with that. It all happened before the credits. Which is just obviously a still of like that weird icebox or whatever. But I fucking loved it. Like that, the show's use of animation is so creative. It's so wonderful, and like we really got like a somewhat physical representation of what it's like for people to be anchored in physical reality, but then be fighting on the astral plane. We've seen this in the X-Men cartoon. Like there were a couple of episodes where, well, obviously Shadow King showed up a couple of times, and one of them I think was an Origin, where we went back to see how Xavier and him actually had their conflict, and there was very much a lot of that projection of the astral self being represented outside of the anchored physical form, and then those projections fighting each other. So what we saw, but certainly not in the way that we saw it. I was very appreciative of what we saw in the way that we saw it. I thought it was very cool. it's such a great way to kind of get us to what we expect to happen in a completely different way than you would expect it to actually happen. Like you would expect it to happen in a like a physical way, right? Like where the show, instead of using animation, tries to actually represent these things happening. And like the kind of things we were seeing, like you would have to spend a lot of money on CGI or whatnot to make it really come off as like authentic. And so I like that they stayed within the limitations of the show budget, but were able to be creative in the way that they represent it. In the end, I feel like it's better than it would be if you just kind of tried to show it as real as possible. I love the green versus the red. I thought it was just such a beautiful way to represent the whole thing, and also kind of like that strange like lip sync for your life moment with them singing the Who song, and I think Farouk was singing it in Farsi, like some sort of Persian dialect. I would assume. That's just sort of the impression I got, because there were no subtitles, and so it was sort of murky with respect to like what actually he was saying. But I know it was about establishing them as reflections of each other, and then finally getting them to come together to fight, and then actually seeing the fight in the way that we did. I think ultimately is what the show wanted to give us before it took us down the rabbit hole into, again, like what happened afterwards. It's really intriguing to kind of think about the idea that like the Shadow King was caught at the beginning of the episode, and then that was not like what the episode was. And funny, we had that time jump also, like right after the credits, 3 years into the future. We saw Melanie and Oliver, their projected selves. It wasn't their physical forms, and they were in that ice cube that Oliver had been in for however many years, and it appeared that like they were kind of losing the grasp of reality, and they said that like their bodies were hidden because everything went to shit. Like essentially that apocalypse that's been foretold by future Sid has happened already, and that they are trying to stay safe in the astral plane and like their little safe kind of niche. And at that moment when we saw that, I thought, shit, like, is this where we're gonna stay? And like the fact that it went back was pretty cool. And I like everything that happened, like in the moments afterwards, with Sid questioning him and us kind of questioning, is this aware Sid or is this controlled Sid? I felt like it was controlled Sid, because I mean, fucking the Shadow King, for God's sake. But then you had that moment where she shoots him, and then that's when we go into the astral plane, and we see him finally interacting with his other personalities, sort of establishing that he is a loon in the nicest way possible. I meant that word, loon, like meaning he's a little loony because he's got multiple personalities, and they all are interacting with each other in his mind and causing confusion for him. Which could ultimately lead to him spiraling out of control. So it's a bit loony. So we saw that, and then outside of that, we saw the role that Lenny had to play, which was to shoot the tuning fork, which was a power suppressor to turn off their powers. Apparently, this is all part of some big plan to depower the Shadow King so they can capture him, and it worked. And then when Sid is kind of going after David, we see Lenny shoots the bullet that Sid shot, causing David to fall into that astral plane moment and then can't come back. And then he took away this idea, or like the memory of like, I think things that had happened within the past day or whatever, or however long it took for her to get to that point of like saying the things that she was saying, which is essentially like, I don't love you, you're a threat to humanity, I didn't see it, and I have to do something about it. And again, it's questionable like what the motivations actually were. Was that the Shadow King controlling her? I mean, obviously, from the standpoint of like the fact that the show is about David, he can be an anti-hero, but can he really truly be a villain? And we don't really know Legion to be that kind of a villain, but then nonetheless he did do villainous things. Like in the comics, he wanted to stop Charles Xavier from having to fight Magneto. And so he went back in time to kill Magneto before he was able to ever like become a thorn in Xavier's side. And instead of killing Magneto, Xavier got in the way. Xavier was killed, and that led to the Age of Apocalypse, which was like a parallel timeline in the present. There were like 8 different X-Men comics at the time. They changed all of their storylines, and it was like epically amazing. It was epically amazing. It was this guy here, Apocalypse. He was like the Emperor, and like there was a resistance, but humans were the ones that were being hunted, and mutants were dominant. And it was a really interesting story. And every character had a completely different origin to them. Cyclops was working for Xavier, Cyclops, and Havoc, which I have right here. Cyclops' brother. It was a really great storyline, and it was all due to David, again, having good intentions, but his powers basically being in control, and thus his powers somewhat being villainous. And so that is somewhat what's being established here. And again, that's sort of, I mean, it's not surprising that it's like an unconventional take on a story, but it is a little bit surprising if they're going to take it all the way to like he's actually the villain. But I mean, Farouk, fucking free, walking around free. They wouldn't let him walk around free like that. He had to be in control. Like he had to be controlling things, and he's definitely pushing David over the edge intentionally, because clearly he feels like he's been wronged by David, and he feels like because he couldn't get him to love him, because he said he tried to get him to love him all those years that he was inside of him, that because he couldn't, that he essentially was spurned by it. Like he felt wronged by it, and he wanted to hurt David, and clearly he did. And David also is having that sort of moment of revelation, of understanding that there is something off about him, and that his mind is fractured, and so that in conjunction with what the Shadow King was doing is ultimately what is going to take David down a very dark path, I would assume, in the next season. And the question is, like, are we going to get like that flip? I mean, I guess it's sort of implied that we're going to get sort of the flip of this season, where the Shadow King and District 3 will be searching for David, and David will be the one being hunted by them. And the Shadow King will simply be walking amongst District 3 or Division 3 as though everything's fine, but in truth, he's actually controlling them. That's my prediction. We'll see. Anyway, I really enjoyed the episode. I really enjoyed the season. Clearly, they had knowledge that they're going to go further than this season, and so I feel like that's why there is sort of a strong sense of lack of resolution. But nonetheless, we got more of what I expect from the show, you know? And interesting enough, they did reference the delusion stuff that they've been sort of tracking throughout the season. And in those moments where you had the multiple personalities in the astral plane. And they essentially established that, like, the delusion for David was that he was a good guy. And so the question is, like, is the Shadow King partly driving those ideas? Like maybe the Shadow King is still in charge in his mind, and he's the one responsible for the fractured mind. No, I don't know. It's just, like, you can speculate all day and night, and in the end, it's just, there's no way to really know for sure. And that's, again, part of the charm of the show. We got a really cool astral plane battle between the Shadow King and David Haller in this episode, and the season and the show's going to continue. So we're going to get a third season, and I'm really excited about that. So anyway, I'm going to sign off here. I think what needed to be said has been said throughout the season, throughout all the reviews that I did for every episode. Still really impressed with the show. I mean, clearly, artistically, this was amazing. This was an amazing episode. And it's the artistry of the show that really elevates the show overall as something more than just a superhero show or whatever. And so that in itself is enough of a draw for me. But the fact that it is about the X-Men universe and it's sort of this weird pocket of it and it's like really leaning into that is so exciting. And I know that more is coming, and I know that there's a big plan here because I'm sure that Noah Hawley has a beginning, middle, and end to this story that he's trying to tell. And based on the fact that he's one of the big creative forces that FX still has, creatively working for them, I have a feeling like they're going to let him tell his story. And so I have a lot of faith in what's going on here, and I look forward to more, and I look forward to talking about it next year when it comes out. But you know what? They've started to cast season 2 of The Gifted. That means they're going to start shooting soon. That means we're going to get that probably, I don't know, October-ish or something. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'll certainly be talking about it. So I'll be here expressing my thoughts on the forthcoming Gifted season 2, which I'm sure is going to be very much in line with what people want from an X-Men show, more of an X-Men centric representation rather than like let's explore the astral plane as much as possible, which this show has a right to do, and it's very special. But obviously a lot of you and me as well, like I want my X-Men and that's it. Like I want as much X-Men as possible, and we're going to get a lot of it in the next season. Where I hear there's going to be divisions. Well, we know there's going to be divisions based on what we saw in the finale of the first season. And so we're going to get some really interesting, I think, storylines, and who knows what's coming. I'm really excited. That show's really good. Not artistically the way this show is, but like in terms of really like diving deep into the X-Men universe and giving us a lot of what one would expect from that show. So that's coming, folks. Don't worry. And then we'll get more Legion next year. And then once all this Disney Marvel shit is resolved and Marvel finally gets the X-Men back, we're going to get a rebooted X-Men universe. I have faith in this. There's been no verification that that's actually going to happen, but I'm 95% sure that that's going to happen, and we're going to get a rebooted X-Men universe in film, and we're going to get something a lot closer to what the X-Men actually are, and we're going to get some pretty impressive stuff, I think, in the next few years, X-Men related. And the fact that Marvel gets the characters back too, that means that it's not just going to be movies, it's not just going to be television shows, we're going to get cartoons, there's going to be all sorts of really cool toys, figures, merchandise. It's going to be an explosion in the most literal sense possible, and me and all of you are going to be very excited about what's to come. So we're closing the book. We're closing the chapter 2 of the Legion story today, but the X-Men story continues on into the future. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. If you haven't already subscribed, you can click that little button below the screen. It's right there. Just click it. It'll help you keep up with future stuff that I'll be bringing. And as always, I want to remind you that if you want to put in, if you have the option to put an X in the box, you should, because it's really important that you understand that nobody is fucking checking me, motherfuckers. And I mean that in the most loving way possible. Thanks for stopping by. I'll catch you soon. Bye-bye.